Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're recording this over Zoom because of coronavirus and social distancing, so apologies if the sound is a bit iffy at any stage. Please do bear with us.
We'd like to welcome you to our podcast called Multiple Sclerosis, Breaking It Down, and this new series that we've called Me, MySelf and I, which focuses on people with MS stories over the past year. So why this topic? Well, the last 12 months have been unlike any other in so many ways. On top of the social restrictions, worries about job security and the health of family and friends, people with MS have also had to contend with the delays to MS services they rely upon. The MS Trust want to highlight the people and faces behind these statistics, and we want to impress the urgent need to get MS services back on track by showing that there's a human story behind each person mentioned in these numbers.
So in this series, we'll be meeting some people with MS and hearing their stories from the past year. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about what it feels like to start a new job during lockdown. We'll be chatting to Amy and her life with MS during the past year. But starting a new job during lockdown, that's what you did, Emma. That must have been a bit weird.
Yeah, so I guess it was a bit of an unusual experience, not something, say, a couple of years ago you'd have imagined doing. But yeah, as you mentioned, we talked to Amy in this podcast, and I actually started on the same day as her. So I think that sort of played in my favour a little bit. It was quite nice in that there were a couple of us starting on the same day, so you didn't feel like the only new person, which was really good. And then obviously everyone at the Trust has been really welcoming. So with, technology allowing, it's been quite helpful being able to do things like Zoom calls and have, these meetings over Zoom and Microsoft Teams and platforms like that, which is really helpful, definitely.
Yeah, I think we were all really worried that you sort of end up feeling lonely, or, just because when you start a new job, there's so much full on kind of inductions and talking to people and seeing things. And you always worry when you see somebody who's new start who's sort of sitting around not having anything to do. But you worry that would happen when people do it sort of virtually. But we've kept you fairly busy, I think.
Yeah, definitely a good amount of things to be getting on with. So no, it's been a really enjoyable experience, and I think it's that balance of getting the work but the social side as well, and getting to know people, which can be challenging when you're working remotely. But again, I think people have been really good with that and made sort of an extra effort because they do understand that it's quite challenging.
Yeah, and I think it does make a lot of difference to have the sort of Zoom calls and stuff rather than just emails, because I always find it hard. Sometimes in the past you could have long email conversations with people for years, but you've never met them. You have no idea what they look like. And it's seeing people, it makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think you sort of get this image in your head of what someone's going to be like. And then if you leave it too long and they're completely different, it's almost like introducing yourself all over again. So I think Zoom helps with that, the visual side of it. I don't think we realise quite how much as humans we rely upon that visual sort of aspect of things.
Shall we have a little listen how it was for Amy?
Yeah, that sounds great.
With me today is Amy, who happens to be one of my new colleagues. Amy joined the MS Trust last year in the middle of the corona strangeness. I'd actually heard of Amy before she joined us, as I knew she was running a Facebook group for young people with MS, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Helena.
Thank you for coming to the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Amy. I am 23, very nearly 24. And as you said, I've just started, 4 months ago now, at the MS Trust as fundraising officer. So that was in December 2020. And I also run a young person support group, which, as you said, we'll talk about later. And I also have a blog as well, where I talk about MS and other invisible illnesses as well.
Great stuff. Let's talk about MS. Let's talk about your diagnosis, because you were diagnosed really young, weren't you?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS in 2018, and it was just after my 21st birthday. So yeah, really young, considering. My diagnosis story itself is a bit of a funny one. So I was actually living in Paris at the time. And one day I noticed a numb feeling in my left leg. But I couldn't really explain it to anyone. I just kept saying, like, my left leg feels really weird. I can't explain it. And I tried to ignore it, as you do, for a few days. But it gradually got worse over about 3 days. And then I decided I probably needed to go and see a doctor. So during this time as well, I was experiencing like lack of coordination, poor balance, literally couldn't walk in a straight line, really had to think about walking. So I went to the doctor and I explained all of this. And he said that he thought it was nothing to worry about and it was probably a trapped nerve. But he sent me for a blood test and a CT scan just to kind of check everything was all right. And they both came back clear. So he thought everything was fine. And then over the next week or so, my left arm then went numb. And I had like pins and needles in my left arm. So I went back to the doctor and I said, look, I still don't think things are right. I really want this looking into more. And he said that he thought that I was bringing on the new symptoms because I was anxious. Yeah, so I asked him outright, I said, do you think it could be MS? Because I've done a lot of Googling and, you know, it was one of the first things that came up.
Yeah.
And everything was kind of pointing to that with my symptoms. And he just said no, because I was too young and I had no family history of it. So I was like, okay, well, that's good news, I suppose. But I still would like it to be looked into a little bit more. And he said he would send me for an MRI scan just to give me peace of mind. So a few weeks later, I went for my MRI scan. And in France, because it's completely different, obviously, to here, they just handed me a book which had all my like scan photos in, and it also had like a CD. And I could kind of see on the images that there were like little white dots. But I obviously didn't know what that meant. And the people doing the scan, they said, right, you've got some areas of inflammation, but you now need to make an appointment with a neurologist. So I was like, okay, fine. Still thinking it's not going to be MS. It'll be something else. And then I decided to fly back to the UK because it had all been a bit, just not a very pleasant experience. Yeah. And it was quite hard, obviously, because the language barrier and things like that. So, I flew back, booked an appointment with a neurologist. I went private just because I wanted it done quickly. And it was really quick. I got an appointment within about a month. The neurologist just took one look at this booklet that I had and diagnosed me.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a really weird experience. It was really quick. It was over about 3 months in total. So it was really, really quick compared to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, strange experience.
Yeah, it must have been. I mean, it makes you wonder a little bit like what stats and things around MS they have in France. Because I mean, obviously before people used to think older people, but I mean, a lot of people are diagnosed in their 20s. So considering it wouldn't be, well, who knows? But
yeah, interesting anyway.
Yeah. How did you feel when you found out? I mean, did you know much about MS beforehand?
No. So obviously I'd done a bit of research after I kind of Googled and it said potentially could be MS. And when I first saw that, I remember it coming up in like, you know, on like the symptom, you can put in all your symptoms and it comes up with a few different conditions. And I remember seeing it and it was like 85% chance that it could be this.
Oh, okay.
I would recommend doing that.
No.
Just go to the doctor. But I remember seeing it and I just thought, well, it can't be, because all I'd ever known up until that point was, you know, older people. Like I think my nan's friend might have had it, or someone saying that their nan had it at school. I didn't know anything about it. I thought that it meant that you would be in a wheelchair, like full stop. And yeah, I had no idea. And obviously I was still really shocked when I was told, because the doctor telling me he didn't think it could be that. So yeah, I was shocked, but I had almost kind of got my head around it by the point that I was diagnosed, because I had been researching so much, which again might not be the best thing to do, but it did make it easier when I like sat in that room and they said, this is what it is. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know anything about it. I did think it was an older person's illness. I didn't know anyone younger.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of that. So yeah, it was a big shock.
I think when I was diagnosed, I was 29, and I was also quite shocked about being sort of, because my granddad had it, but then, you know, he was an old person. Well, certainly when I was 29, he felt like an old person. But yeah, so I didn't really know that. And then when you actually look at the statistics, where they say sort of women tend to be a lot of women and in their 20s to 30s, and you kind of think, oh, hang on, that's me, I'm smack bang in the middle of that. But I did really not know those stats before I was diagnosed myself. So it's
no, I think you never really know about anything until it actually affects you. Like any sort of illness, you don't really know much about, just generally. So yeah, it's really interesting now knowing what I know about MS compared to when I first found out. It's so different, like how I think about it and everything now.
And I suppose that's why things like MS Awareness Week and doing a lot of work online and the MS Trust, you know, trying to reach out to many people to explain that actually it is not just an old, I mean, obviously old people have it as well, but I mean, you see a lot of pediatric cases of MS now as well. So do you think that when you sort of think back that you had any symptoms before you were diagnosed?
Yeah, so this is something I've thought about probably over the last like 2 years. And I realised there were a few tiny things, but you literally just don't think about them until you kind of start piecing things together. But there was a time, probably 2 years before I was diagnosed, where I had a numb finger, just one finger. And I remember for ages just thinking it was like an infection or something, but there wasn't anything visible. So I was like, how can it be an infection? And I ignored it. I probably should have gone to the doctors at the time, but I just thought it's one of those things. But looking back, I think it was on my left hand. So again, it kind of ties in. And then there was another time, I think about a year or a few months before my actual diagnosis, and like the bottom of my spine towards the left, that was also numb. So yeah, again, I think there were definitely little signs, but when it's like little things that don't really bother you, like I just thought, oh, that's a bit of a weird feeling, and I just didn't really look into it too much, and then it kind of went away. So
yeah, I think that rings true with a lot of people's stories, because I had numb foot when my first symptoms started happening, and I just thought I'd done something stupid. I mean, I had like trapped nerve, or I pulled something when I was at the gym and things. So it wasn't like until other things started sort of to happen too, that because you just accept that sometimes the body does weird things. But well, I mean, MS has got so many strange symptoms. What sort of symptoms are you mostly experiencing?
So on a day-to-day basis, I would say that I am very lucky and I don't really have any daily symptoms other than fatigue. My fatigue is terrible at the moment. Don't really know why specifically at the moment. I'd say the past year it's been quite bad as well. And I'd say I've had fatigue for years. And I also have something called pernicious anemia, which also causes fatigue. So yeah,
it's hard to know where it comes from. So yeah,
I'm tired all the time, but I've just learned to kind of stop when I need to stop and take rest when I need to take rest, which is hard because I like to be busy and I like to be doing stuff. So that's my biggest symptom. And then say if I have a really bad night's sleep, or I've done too much the day before, or sometimes like after I've exercised, I'll get a few of my old symptoms flare up. So like I'll get the pins and needles in my arm, or I'll get like a numb finger, or my leg will be a bit slower than normal. So yeah, that's basically it with my symptoms at the moment. So I think, yeah, I do feel very lucky, because I know that people do have a lot more on a daily basis.
Fatigue. I mean, and you mentioned the past year. Let's talk about lockdown. How has it been? I mean, obviously, there's been good things, because you came and joined us, which we're very happy about. But tell us about your past year. How was it?
Yeah, it's been a really crazy year. I think I've really looked back at it over the last week or so, because it's been the year since the kind of year anniversary. But yeah, so it kind of, this time last year, for me, I was probably feeling the best I've ever felt. I was working full time in my job at the time. I was on my feet for like 8 hours a day, and then I was also training for a marathon like in my evenings and on my days off. And I honestly have never felt healthier and fitter and just generally better. And so I went from that to then I got an injury basically just before lockdown, which was really annoying. So I then had to stop my running, and then I also got put on furlough. So I went from literally doing everything to doing nothing. And I think my body was just a bit like, what is happening? What are you doing? And then symptoms started to flare up, and I just then started to feel really rubbish, like mentally, physically. I was on furlough in the end for 4 months, which some people I think enjoyed, but I hated it.
Yeah.
It just took all my motivation. I just really didn't enjoy any part of it. Obviously couldn't see friends, couldn't see family. So I'd say the first like 4 months were difficult, and then I got made redundant like the end of summer. Then I managed to get a new job in recruitment, which it was okay, made me do something. It kept me busy, which was good. And then I kept applying for jobs because I knew I kind of wanted to do something a bit different. And then thankfully I came across the MS Trust job. So it's kind of done a bit of a 360. Like, it started off quite rubbish, but it ended up being actually quite a good year for me.
Yeah.
I was living in Manchester city centre with a friend this time last year, and because I was so uncertain about like my financial situation and my job and everything, I decided to move out. So I moved back home with my mum, which I never thought I would do. I thought I was out for good. I thought I was just going to do my own thing now. So that was really hard as well.
Yeah.
But now I've stayed at home, and now I'm looking at, I've put an offer in for a flat, so I'm going to be buying my own.
Exciting.
Yeah, so a lot of good things now have come out of it, and it's given me a lot of time to really focus on what I want to do. It's given me a lot of time to focus on my support group, my blog, things like that, and really like focus on things that I want to do and like where I want to be this time next year. It hasn't all been bad, but there has obviously been hard times, like for anyone.
Do you find then running support group that's sort of as helpful when you're feeling a bit low yourself?
Definitely, yeah. So the reason why I set it up was because when I was diagnosed, I just couldn't I found lots of different support out there, but I didn't find anything specifically for young people. And I felt like I really needed that. I really needed people that I could relate to, that were kind of going through the same things as me, that were in like the same place in their life as me. So that's why I set up the group, and it was almost like not a selfish thing, but it was to help. It was because I needed it. So I was like, I'm going to do that because that will help me.
Yeah.
And now it's amazing. Like any worries that I have or any questions that I have, I put them to the group, and the group's always there. And it's just really nice to know that to just hear other people's stories as well, and know that they're also going through very similar things, if not the same things. It's been a massive help, definitely over the last year as well.
Yeah, I found, because I'm one of the moderators of the MS Trust Facebook group, and obviously that's how I had heard about you, because I saw you posting about your group in there, and everybody thought it was such a great idea to have a group for younger people, because the MS Trust group, that's a huge group. I mean, it's about 12,000 members. I did find, like, because I was furloughed as well, but I was still keeping an eye on the group, not working, but like as a participant, which was quite interesting to sort of be on the other side. But yeah, just the idea of like other people going through the same sort of thing. And I think that kind of daily exercise that you miss from just walking into work or doing things really got to a lot of people. And I think a lot of people just felt quite, I mean, everybody was feeling down. The whole nation was feeling quite down. But I think like the sort of fatigue could get really, really, really hard to deal with. And I was the same, because I was up to when I was working, being super active, and I was also running and doing all these things. So when I was furloughed, I just kept up the running. And I think that was almost what got me through furlough. I think had I been injured, I probably would have been, just sat in a corner and not really been very happy at all. So, are you back to running now?
Well, I went on my first run for quite a while the other day, and I was quite poorly a few weeks ago with something unrelated, but it flared up a lot of my MS symptoms, and I don't think it's helped with my fatigue and stuff. So after that run, it took me about 4 days to get back to normal. So I've decided to kind of take things a bit slower. But yeah, it's something that made me feel so much better. And again, it's something I feel really lucky to be able to do, having MS. So I feel like because I can do it, hopefully when I'm feeling a bit stronger and stuff, I want to do it. I want to, be able to let my body run while I can. Yeah.
I used to always feel when I was out sort of running, and I would think about some of the people in the group and what they were going through, and it powered me through my runs, because I felt like, it is a privilege to be able to run. And it was it does help. So a lot of people have had it as a kind of really negative experience, lockdown. What do you think? I mean, obviously being on furlough, you said was hard, but was that the hardest part for you, or?
So I think definitely I would say those first few months were the hardest part. I think for most people those were probably the hardest part, because no one really knew what they were doing. It was all quite scary. Obviously it's still very scary, it's still ongoing, but it was so scary back then. I remember just being terrified of like even leaving the house. So those first few months were really, really hard. And then obviously just the whole year. So I've got a baby niece who she was 1 at Christmas. So it was really hard not being able to see her very often. Just not being able to see my friends. I'm used to just being able to go and like pop for a walk, see my friends. So those were all of that was very difficult. But I mean, everyone was in the same situation. So I think knowing that, you kind of knew that it wasn't just you. And like having to move back home as I said, that was really hard, because I would say I'm very independent, and I always have been. And like I said before, like I've lived in Paris. Like I'm not used to being around my family all the time. So yeah, that was really hard. But there have been loads of positives as well. Like I kind of touched on, like being able to start this job remotely, although it's been difficult and there's been like challenges starting the new job. I feel really lucky that I've been able to start remotely and work from home. And obviously I'm based in Manchester, so the office is in Letchworth. And I just think if it wasn't for the pandemic, maybe they would need someone that was based in Letchworth, and if I wasn't maybe willing to relocate, I wouldn't have even been able to apply for this job. So I think it's definitely opened up doors that might not have been open otherwise. And also, as much as I hated the time that I was on furlough, as I said before, it gave me the time to focus on things that it made me realize what I wanted to do as like a job. It made me have a complete career change. So before I was working in retail and recruitment, and then completely changed and moved to the charity sector because I realized that's definitely more what I want to do. I want to give something back. And then it gave me time to focus on my support group. I grew my support group loads over the summer. So there were loads of positives, but
it must have been quite strange starting a new job though, because you started the other one as well, didn't you? The job you had before the MS Trust one during lockdown.
I've done it twice now. I'm a pro. So I started that job, and that was a lot of like calling people on the phone. Again, that was something that I'd never done before, but I just kind of needed a job, and that was the first one that I was offered. So I was like, yeah, let's go for this one. And yeah, that was completely out of my comfort zone. Really weird again, being like working from home. But yeah, it is good in a lot of ways because, you know, I don't have a commute. No one has a commute anymore. Well, some people do, but I don't have a commute. And like dealing with things like fatigue, not having a commute is massive. You know, it gives you so much. It gives me an extra half an hour in bed that I wouldn't have otherwise. And that's like invaluable to someone with MS that really badly suffers from fatigue. So all of that is a massive positive, starting a job in lockdown.
It'd be very interesting to sort of see how the world changes around recruitment and things like that. Like you said, you're not local to Letchworth, but it's about finding the right person rather than a person who happens to be in the right location. And I really hope that more and more companies will do, you know, consider remote working for the long run, because that would mean a huge deal for people with MS, you know, or other conditions that would maybe keep you from applying for jobs sort of further away from where you live. So
yeah, it's a massive benefit, and you know, it will open doors for people that perhaps if they, you know, because there's loads of jobs like in London, maybe not right now, but you know, there's loads and loads of jobs in lots of different sectors down there. And if you don't want to live in London, before now you couldn't apply for a job in London. But I think it will definitely benefit. It should benefit a lot of people because everyone's proven that you can work from home and you still do what you need to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, it has been amazing. I think from when lockdown happened and all the MS Trust had to sort of start working from home, it went very quickly. They got set up very quickly and we were all sort of on Teams and we were doing things. And now it's become the new normal because it's been going for a year. So it's bizarre, but it's still quite strange to think that I've never met you in person.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's the only weird bit.
You're just like a head, so you don't have no idea. Like you might be super tall or like really short. I have no idea. So it'd be really nice to actually do meet you in person once we get allowed to do so.
Yeah, definitely.
So obviously this week was the lowering of the kind of rules that have been, and we're slowly coming out of lockdown. What are you looking forward to? What?
Lots of things, but really like little simple things. I think that's one of the positives that I think everyone can probably take from lockdown, that I think now we all appreciate the little things in life a lot more than we did. For me, it's things like literally just being able to go out for a meal, because it's one of my favorite things to do, to go out for a nice meal, to meet my friends again, you know, to be able to just see my family all the time, just to hug people. It is just the little things, and yeah, just getting back to some sort of normality. I don't think it's going to be normal, like normal life for a long time, but just even those little things are going to make such a difference, and I don't think anyone will ever take them for granted again. Well, I hope not.
How has your contact been with like MS nurses or your MS team? Has that worked during lockdown?
It hasn't been great. So during the first lockdown, I thought I was having a relapse quite early on. I think it was just after I kind of stopped everything and my body was just a bit like, what's going on? And I got in touch with my MS team just to get some advice and kind of see if I needed to do anything. And they just didn't get back to me. So I called again like a few weeks later, even though my symptoms then had gone. And then about 2 weeks after that, I heard back from them, and they were helpful. They obviously then couldn't really tell me to do anything because it had already happened. But they booked me in for an MRI scan. So that was all arranged. And thankfully it didn't turn out to be a relapse. So it was fine in the end. But yeah, that was quite difficult because I felt like it was quite a long time to go without answers. And I felt a bit like, I don't know what I should be doing. I don't know if I should just literally lie in bed and try and rest, or I just really didn't know what to do. So that was hard. And then I had my annual appointment with my consultant on FaceTime. So that was weird, but you know, it was.
Did you have to do the test where you push? Obviously, you can't push anything.
No, couldn't do anything. No, so it was just it. That was a bit. I felt like I didn't get as much out of it as I normally would, because he just asked me a few things and then I answered and that was it. But again, you know, there weren't any like major concerns from my point of view. So it was okay that happened. But I imagine that would be quite frustrating for someone that maybe needed a bit more support. And what else? Yeah, I just think in general, like there's been a few times where I've needed to call my MS nurse and then they haven't got back for quite a long time. But like it is understandable, and like we all know why. I don't feel angry about it. It's just a shame really that there's like we don't have more MS nurses. And it's just a shame more than anything. But I think they've done what they can, and you know, thankfully I haven't needed any more support than I've been given. So it hasn't been too bad, but it's just been slower than normal.
And I think we certainly heard about that in the first wave, how a lot of MS nurses got redeployed elsewhere.
Exactly.
So I think more of them have got back, but I think it's still been a tricky situation. And I guess you and I got a job where you're fighting for more MS nurses in post.
Exactly, yeah. So I have actually spoken to some MS nurses recently after I was poorly the other week. And they were amazing. Like they've been really good. So I think everything is slowly getting back to normal. But
Yeah, it must have been frustrating for them as well to sort of be pulled off to do completely different things. And I think, I mean, the NHS, in my personal experience during the year, have been amazing in the way that what they pulled. I mean, the whole vaccine program and everything is gone so fantastically well, really, how fast it's gone. But yeah, it's really worrying when you do hear of people who've sort of got mobility issues and things, because you can't really, like you say, you can do some bits of the EDSS check on a camera because you could walk up and down and stand on one leg and stuff, but you couldn't do the pushing thing because they can't feel you, the power in your arms, could they? So it's
and I think for people trying to get diagnosed as well, I've heard a lot of stories of people coming to my group and saying, it took so long. And I've had a lot of people get in touch with me as well to say that they're just not getting diagnosed, and the doctors and everything keep saying, we're pretty sure it's MS, but we just can't get you an appointment to officially diagnose it yet. So that must be really hard as well.
You need to tell us how people can find both your blog and your group.
Yes. So my blog, it's www.butyoudon'tlookIll.com. That's the blog website. And then it's But You Don't Look Ill on Instagram. And then the group, so again on Instagram, it's MS Together Official. And on Facebook, I think if you type in MS Together Official as well, you'll find us. And you can just request to join on there. Fantastic.
And obviously, I would be silly not to point out that you can come and join the MS Trust Facebook group as well.
Of course.
If you search for Multiple Sclerosis Trust on Facebook, you'll find us there. Yeah, no, I think the online community has been amazing during the whole thing. I think it's been so much support. And I mean, I suppose there's a lot of fear and fake news and things like that has been flying around. So then it's quite nice to have these groups that actually do pull out the proper facts and what is really going on, because a lot of people do get very worried because you were saying about going and kind of talking to Dr. Google when you first experience symptoms. And I think we're all guilty of that at some point, but it's not always the best approach.
I would not recommend.
No, I wouldn't either. I think, give the MS Trust a call, or, talk to another MS organization that's got information. But we're always here to chat to you, even if not just for people who have MS, but people who are experiencing weird symptoms and things. Yeah. Because there certainly is a lot of different symptoms in MS.
Lots and lots.
Right, well, thank you so much for talking to us today, Amy. It's been
thank you for having me.
And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person one day.
Yeah, fingers crossed it's not too long.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here is where there would be an advert. But as we're a charity, we don't do that. So instead, we like to take this opportunity to tell you all about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Our website, which is www.mstrust.org.uk, has tons of information and resources for people affected by multiple sclerosis.
And if you wanted to find out more about working life in MS, there's a section on our website under Life with MS.
And we're back.
Right. How did you feel Amy's story was compared to yours, starting a new job?
I think obviously the experiences simply of starting a new role were very similar. Obviously I haven't had quite the same journey as she has had. But as I mentioned earlier, obviously it's been nice to have that comparison and have someone there in a similar position to bounce these sort of new feelings off of.
Yeah, I feel we were very lucky to get both of you two starting at the same time as well, because you've both been so lovely and easy to work with, which has been really nice. And as another person with MS, I felt it was really nice when Amy came and joined us as well. And I'm so impressed about the work that she's been doing with the group as well for the newly diagnosed, the young people with MS, because I feel like, having looked after our Facebook group for a long time, young people often find that it's hard to sort of find people that are in the same situation as yourself, because a lot of centres and things like that have got sort of older people at them. So I really feel like she's done some great work there.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a really brilliant thing to do. As you mentioned, there's not necessarily always that space for people, younger people with MS, to have the connections that they might like to, even though it obviously um, is a condition that affects more younger people potentially than older. There's not always that platform for them to have these discussions and talk about just things like, that affect young people as well. It doesn't have to be multiple sclerosis based.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, there's a lot of friendships that's made in those type of groups without, I mean, you join them because you have MS, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's why you become friends with people.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's good to have some support, and especially when you're talking about things like working life, because I do know for our own Facebook group that there is a lot of work-related questions, and there could be, things like just small adjustments and things that you could ask, if people have got issues with going to the toilet a lot, could you ask, how do you approach your boss to ask, could I sit closer to the door? I mean, there's could be simple things that can be done, but sometimes it's quite hard to approach the subject. So it is helpful to have someone to sort of bounce off the ideas, just how to approach it. I think maybe we should talk a little bit about the subject of disclosure. Obviously, for myself and for Amy starting a job at the MS Trust, it wouldn't really be an issue to talk about MS, but I do see this topic sort of come up now and again in the Facebook group. And do you have to tell your employer if you have MS is the question a lot of people ask. And the answer in most cases is that you don't. Jobs where you have to tell your employer include things like being in the armed forces or driving heavy goods vehicle where the health and safety, well, there's like health and safety considerations. But there's a lot other things to consider, of course, if having MS may impact on your work. You might need a bit more support, and it might actually be beneficial for you to let your employer know, like we were saying about, being asked to move closer to the toilet. That's like one of the things where you can get some of these adjustments made for you. And under the Equality Act, all employers must make reasonable adjustment for people for employees with MS. And that includes like ensuring more regular breaks, allowing time off for medical appointments, and providing parking space closer to the entrance if you've got problems with like mobility or fatigue.
That's really good to know, because I think, as you've mentioned, especially on our Facebook group, there's been quite a lot of these sort of questions where people don't really know their rights when it comes to things like employment. So definitely a useful thing to make note of. Before you worked with the MS Trust, Helena, did you tell your previous employer about your multiple sclerosis?
I did. In my previous job, I had to take off a fair chunk of time to go to like hospital appointments as I was going through my diagnosis. And I was sort of in my late 20s, and I suspect a lot of people thought that I might be pregnant, when of that age and running to the hospital, people were kind of wondering what was going on. And I had a really nice and understanding manager. So I really wanted to let him know what was going on. And so he never asked me about it. He was very fine, like to let me get on with whatever I was getting on with. But when I told him, he sort of advised me to talk to HR. And I sort of spoke to them on the same day as I was diagnosed, I think. And they were actually really helpful. So they got me to see like an occupational therapist to sort out my desk to make sure that I was, sitting correctly. And then they also allowed me to work from home a few days a week. And, this was like back in 2007. So it's not like now when we all have to work from home. But so it wasn't very common. So they were actually very good. So for me, it was actually a really positive experience. But I've heard some bad stories about people sort of coming out about their MS diagnosis at work too.
That's a real shame that there's, some people are having a difficult time with this. But obviously, please remember that we've got some really great resources on our website, and they can help you talk to your employer and explain your MS to them if you need to. Our information team are always happy to receive questions from employers and employees as well who want to know more about MS.
And like I said, I've heard a lot of bad experience where people with MS have in the past have to give up work before they necessarily wanted to, just because they were not able to have flexible working arrangements. But now during 2020, we really proved that flexible working can actually be really productive. So bosses are a lot more open to it, I think. And if flexible working becomes a part of culture, I think it would really help everyone with disabilities, or fatigue and things like that, to stay in work and stay productive. So, fingers crossed that we actually really learn something from this.
So just remember that if you've got any questions about MS or any work-related questions as well relating to MS, our inquiry service is available Monday to Friday, except from UK bank holidays, and that's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of these hours, you're welcome to leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as possible.
You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can find this podcast on Spotify, Google and Apple Podcast, and Amazon Music. Get in touch, and as they say, like and subscribe. Thanks for chatting to me today, Emma.
Thank you.
And we would also like to say a big thank you to Anne Chapman Audio for providing us with this podcast theme tune.